When he arrived, he hesitated at the doorstep, the weight of the morning pressing on him once more. He raised his hand to knock, but faltered, unsure if this was the right thing to do. Yet, as he heard faint murmurs from inside, he knew he couldn't leave without speaking to her. Summoning his courage, he knocked on the door only to be greeted by the butler, who informed him that Sicil was in her room. When he knocked on her room door gently, there was no answer. He cautiously pushed the door open. There she was, cradled in her mother's arms, her face streaked with fresh tears. The sight made his chest tighten, but he schooled his expression, masking the storm inside him. Jane looked up and offered him a small, knowing smile. "Good morning, Sebastian," she greeted softly. "You've come at the right time. She needs you." Sebastian nodded, grateful for the quiet understanding in her voice. "Thank you, Jane," he said, his tone sincere. "I'll talk to her." Jane stood, her hand brushing gently over Sicil's shoulder. "You both need to figure this out. I'll go check on breakfast." As her mother left, Sebastian took a careful step forward. Sicil looked up at him, her tear-filled eyes filled with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Sebastian approached Sicil cautiously, his gaze never leaving hers. "Sicil," he said, his voice low and steady, "I came here because I need you to know what happened between us. It wasn't your fault. It was a moment born out of something we've both been holding on to for so long, and I don't regret it. Not for a second." He knelt before her, taking her hand gently in his fingers brushing her cheek with a tenderness that made her shiver. "You have nothing to be ashamed of," he continued, his eyes searching hers. "Our feelings for each other, they're real. They always have been. And whatever happens next, I want you to know that I'm here for you, always." Sicil's breath hitched, tears welling up in her eyes once more. "Sebastian," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I love you. I've never stopped, but I'm scared. I'm terrified of giving you my heart again only to have it shattered. And Ethan, he's been so good to me, so constant. I care for him too. I feel like I'm betraying him by even saying this, by feeling this way." Her voice broke as she continued. "I don't know what to do. I've hurt you, hurt Ethan, and I hate myself for it. But no matter how hard I try, I can't let you go. You're part of me." Sebastian listened in silence, his expression unreadable but his touch grounding her. After a moment, he spoke, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Sicil, I understand. Loving two people, it's not something anyone plans for, and it's not easy to admit. But I want you to know that I don't regret any of it. But I also see what you're going through, and I don't want to be the reason for your pain. You love Ethan. I see that. And I know he loves you, maybe in ways I never could. I think maybe it's time I step back." Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. "Sebastian, no, listen to me," he interrupted softly, his grip tightening ever so slightly on her hand. "I will never stop loving you, Sicil. You're in my blood, my soul. But I can't hold you back. You deserve to be happy, even if that happiness isn't with me." He smiled faintly, the expression bittersweet. "I've been thinking about going back to Aunt Jasmine. Of course, after we have successfully delivered the Climate Quest event. Maybe it's for the best. You'll have the space to figure things out, to live your life without me complicating it." Her tears fell freely now, her hand clutching his as if afraid to let him go. "But Seb, I don't want you to go," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I love you, I always have, and I'm scared of losing you again, scared of hurting you, who's done nothing but love me." He paused, his thumb brushing away a stray tear on her cheek. "If I'm part of your heart, then I'll stay there no matter what happens. But I don't want to cause you pain, or Ethan. And if stepping back gives you the clarity you need, I'll do it. I just want you to be happy, Sicil. That's all I've ever wanted." Her heart twisted at his words, the selflessness in his voice both comforting and heartbreaking. "Seb, I don't deserve your kindness," she murmured. "You deserve to figure out what you truly want," he countered gently. "And whatever decision you make, I'll respect it. But for now, let's focus on what's in front of us. We have an event to deliver, and our families are counting on us. We can't let our personal struggles overshadow that. Sicil nodded slowly, his words a lifeline amidst her inner turmoil. She wiped her tears and straightened her shoulders, finding strength in his unwavering presence. "You're right," she said quietly. "Our responsibilities come first. We owe it to them, and to ourselves, to see this through." Sebastian smiled softly, the warmth in his eyes easing the weight on her chest. "One step at a time," he said. "No pressure, no rush. We'll figure out the rest when the time comes." Unable to hold back, Sicil stepped forward and embraced him tightly, her face buried against his chest. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with gratitude, "for everything." Sebastian pressed a gentle kiss to the top of her head, his arms wrapping around her protectively. "Always." Sebastian stepped out of the room quietly, leaving Sicil to gather herself and prepare for the day. He paused outside the door for a moment, letting out a steadying breath before making his way toward the dining room. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and warm bread greeted him as he entered, where Jane and Albert were already seated at the table. Albert's sharp eyes landed on him immediately, his brow furrowing as if he could sense the weight Sebastian carried. "Sebastian," Albert greeted, gesturing for him to sit. "Join us. Breakfast is ready." Jane offered him a warm, welcoming smile. "Good morning, Sebastian. How are you holding up?" Sebastian hesitated but took a seat across from them, feeling the quiet scrutiny of Sicil's parents. "Good morning," he said softly, glancing between them. "I'm managing. It's been a lot to process." Jane poured him a cup of coffee, her movements calm and deliberate. "I imagine it has been. Sicil's been carrying a heavy burden, and it's clear you care about her deeply." Albert leaned forward, his expression firm but not unkind. "Care about her? He's in love with her, Jane. Anyone with eyes can see that." He fixed Sebastian with a determined stare. "So, what are you planning to do about it?" Sebastian's jaw tightened, his gaze dropping to the steam rising from his cup. "I've been thinking about stepping away after the event," he admitted. "Going back to Aunt Jasmine, giving Sicil space to figure out what she wants without me complicating things." Albert's chair scraped against the floor as he leaned back, his expression darkening. "Step away? Is that what you think love is? Walking away when things get hard?" "Albert," Jane interjected gently, her tone holding a note of caution. "No, Jane, he needs to hear this," Albert said, his voice firm but not unkind. He turned back to Sebastian. "I've seen the way you look at her. You don't just love Sicil. You belong with her, and she loves you too. Running away won't solve anything. It'll only hurt both of you more." Sebastian clenched his fists under the table, his voice low. "And what if staying hurts her more? She's torn, Albert. I've seen it. Ethan's a good man, and part of me feels like she'd be happier with him." Albert scoffed, shaking his head. "Happier? You think love is about logic, about weighing the pros and cons like it's some business deal? Love is messy, boy. It's painful, but it's also worth fighting for. If you walk away now, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." Jane reached out, placing a gentle hand on Albert's arm. "Let him speak, Albert," she said softly before turning her kind eyes to Sebastian. "Sebastian, I understand why you feel the way you do, and I agree that pushing Sicil to make a choice she's not ready for isn't fair to her or you. But leaving might not be the solution either." Sebastian met her gaze, his own filled with doubt. "Then what do I do? I don't want to make things harder for her. I just want her to be happy." Jane nodded, her tone measured and calm. "And that's why you need to take your time. Give Sicil the space she needs, yes, but don't make any hasty decisions. Let her see for herself what her heart truly wants. Sometimes the best thing you can do for someone you love is simply to be there, steady, patient, and unwavering." Albert grumbled, but didn't interrupt, his arms crossed over his chest. Jane continued, her voice soothing. Leaving now might feel like the noble thing to do, but it could also leave Sicil feeling abandoned, confused, and even more torn. If you truly love her, be present, not to pressure her, but to support her. Let things unfold naturally without rushing to conclusions. Sebastian let her words sink in, the quiet wisdom of her advice striking a chord. "I just don't want to make the wrong choice," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Jane smiled gently, her eyes full of understanding. The right choice isn't always the easiest one, Sebastian. But whatever you decide, make sure it's something you can live with. Albert leaned forward again, his tone softening slightly. Sebastian, I may be old-fashioned, but I believe in fighting for the people you love. Don't give up on Sicil just because things are complicated. Life's full of complications. It's how we deal with them that defines us. Sebastian nodded slowly, the weight of their words settling over him like a heavy but comforting blanket. Thank you, he said sincerely, his voice steadier now. I'll think about it. Jane reached across the table, giving his hand a reassuring squeeze. That's all we can ask. And whatever you decide, know that we're here for you and for Sicil. The three of them shared a quiet moment, the tension easing ever so slightly as the smell of breakfast filled the air. As the conversation tapered off, the clinking of cutlery against plates was the only sound filling the room. A few moments later, the soft patter of Sicil's footsteps echoed down the hallway, signaling her arrival. When she entered the dining room, her presence shifted the atmosphere. She looked refreshed, though the faint shadows under her eyes betrayed her restless night. Her gaze flitted briefly to Sebastian before she offered a quiet, "Good morning," to everyone. "Morning, darling," Jane greeted warmly, gesturing for her to sit. Albert gave her a little nod, his usual boisterous demeanor tempered by the weight of the unspoken. Sebastian managed a polite, "Good morning," keeping his tone neutral. Sicil took her seat, her movements composed but a little stiff, as though she could feel the undercurrents of tension in the room. She glanced around, noting the uncharacteristic silence. "Did I interrupt something?" she asked softly, her eyes darting between her parents and Sebastian. "Not at all," Jane assured her quickly, her voice smooth and reassuring. "We were just catching up with Sebastian. It's nothing important." Albert opened his mouth as if to speak, but caught Jane's subtle glance and thought better of it. He grunted softly and reached for his coffee instead. The silence stretched as the family settled into their breakfast. The occasional clink of forks on plates punctuated the stillness, but no one ventured to start a new conversation. Sebastian kept his eyes on his plate, occasionally stealing a glance at Sicil, who seemed to be lost in thought. The quiet wasn't entirely uncomfortable, but it was far from their usual lively breakfast atmosphere. Even Jane, who typically found a way to keep the conversation flowing, chose to let the silence linger, respecting the fragility of the moment. When the last bite was taken and the coffee cups emptied, Jane rose from her seat, smoothing her napkin over the table. "Well," she said brightly, breaking the silence with practiced ease, "it's time to get going. Another busy day ahead." Albert grumbled his agreement, standing to retrieve his coat. "Don't let me catch any of you slacking off," he teased lightly, his attempt to inject some normalcy into the moment. Sebastian nodded and pushed back his chair, glancing at Sicil once more as she stood. Their eyes met briefly, a world of unspoken words hanging in the air between them. "Let's head out," Sicil said quietly, her tone measured as she turned toward the door. Sebastian followed his resolve, firming with every step. Today was another day, and while the weight of their tangled emotions remained, there was work to be done, and time, however fleeting, to find clarity.